have you gotten a chance to talk to Michael Carlin? He was working with Russell Poole right before Russell Poole passed. And it seems like he's getting pushed outside of the conversation.
Now we need to check out another part of Michael Carlin's theory. Reggie Wright Jr. and the allegedly dirty cops who he and Suge Knight was bringing into the inner circle of death row.
You got a lot to cover up, y'all.
Freudian slip.
You got a lot to cover up.
We got a lot to cover up.
Well, who do you think killed Tupac?
I believe Orlando Anderson killed Tupac.
Are Sharitha and Reggie Wright Jr. telling the truth? Michael Carlin doesn't think so.
So guys,
What's going on?
Greg Kading is out. His lawyer won't let him do it, so
we've been waiting around for Kading all day, and
yeah, and now
he's not
he's a
coming.
no-show.
Really, I wanted to talk to him because there's so much to ask him.
Yeah.
All right, everybody. I'm going to spend time today talking about who killed Bobby Finch. And this is from an article that appeared in the Compton Times. And the Compton Times is being circulated right now as we speak throughout Compton. It's going out to about 30,000 people in the Compton area. And this is by guest columnist Michael Douglas Carlin. And here's how the article goes. The assassination attempt of Tupac and Suge Knight in Las Vegas was a total failure. Of the up to 17 shots fired from at least 2 guns, Tupac was hit 4 times and Suge was hit only once. Suge would check himself out of the hospital hours later. Tupac was severely injured but expected to survive. With 2 bullets in the chest, one of those ricocheted through his finger, 1 bullet hit his arm, and another bullet hit his thigh. Both men were worth more dead than they were alive, and they were swimming with a sea of snakes that wanted to take from them what they had rightfully earned. Suge Knight made the record business look so easy, and there was no shortage of people that thought they could do what he did. It just wasn't so simple. Tupac, on the other hand, had recorded hundreds of songs that were in the vault. The entire music industry knew that dead Tupac would sell way more albums than alive Tupac. But who was Tupac? Big Gip said it best. Tupac was a superstar before we knew what a superstar was in rap music. He was the first sex symbol as far as rap in our generation. He set the blueprint on doing 5 songs a night. I don't know too many people that could sell 6 million records from the grave. He was a phenomenon by himself. And on September 7th, 1996, Tupac was shot in Las Vegas. While he's in the hospital healing from his wounds and expected to live, another man was shot in Compton, and his name was Bobby Ray Finch. A bit of background on Compton in 1996 as relates to Death Row Records. The head of homicide was Reggie Wright Sr., and the head of security for Death Row Records was Reggie Wright Jr. In normal channels, this wouldn't really mean anything. But when it comes to Death Row Records, it was a substantial conflict of interest. Suge Knight founded the company, and his roots back into the neighborhood in Compton ran deep. The roots of the Wrights aligned with the Grape Street Crips as well as the Southside Crips. One of the neighbors of Bobby Finch told me about Reggie Wright Sr. hanging out in South Park with all the Southside Crips in a cozy and extremely comfortable relationship not common among a cop and OGs. These special kinds of relationships are only reserved in the neighborhood for those that make money together and can maintain a symbiotic relationship. Less than a block from where Bobby Finch was killed, the Compton PD had a drug house that was also a smorgasbord of prostitution. Outsiders from Los Angeles would visit the party house and do drugs and have sex, and they would leave behind their cash, and from time to time, which would be collected by the Compton PD. You see, the Compton Police Department was known in the streets to be corrupt. The main character in Training Day was loosely based upon the lives and characters of Reggie Wright Sr., who was known to say, "Do you want to go home or do you want to go to jail?" and LAPD Rampart Scandal cop Rafael Perez. These investigators were in stark contrast to the LAPD detective that I had known, Russell Poole, that kept the homicide investigator's creed close to his desk at all times. It stated that no greater honor will ever be bestowed on you as a police officer or a more profound duty imposed on you than when you are entrusted with the investigation of the death of a human being. It's your moral duty, and as an officer entrusted with such a duty, it is incumbent upon you to follow the course of events and the facts as they develop to their ultimate conclusion. It is a heavy responsibility. As such, let no person deter you from the truth or your personal conviction to see that justice is done. So when an internal affairs investigation was undertaken by the mayor of Compton, working with other police in the department to conduct an audit, it was no surprise that 96 kilos of cocaine was missing out of the evidence locker. 55 gallons of PCP missing. 15,000 pounds of marijuana missing. 2,400 guns missing. In the 9 years leading up to the disbandment of the Compton Police Department, there were 606 murders. In the 9 years after, there were 385 murders. But equally important was the fact that there were 275 open murder investigations just prior to the Compton PD turning over responsibility to the sheriffs, and there were only 24 open murder investigations right after. 251 of the murder books had been purged by the Compton PD prior to handing over the baton. This high rate of murder was transpiring while two cemeteries in Compton were experiencing irregularities on their grounds. Bodies were being dumped into those cemeteries among the many bodies supposed to be there, and those body parts were being intermingled. We can only get insight into the reasons why these files were purged when we examine a murder that has metadata that we can analyze. The murder of Bobby Finch fits this bill because he was the first person killed just 4 days after the Tupac and Suge Knight are shot on the Las Vegas Strip, and just a few days before Tupac died in the hospital. This murder is perhaps the Rosetta Stone we can use to decipher the motives, means, and opportunities behind many of the murders in Compton, using this one case and the associated metadata to get to this truth. My investigation. I spent time in Compton speaking to neighbors about the murder of Bobby Finch. I walked down Mayo Street and visited the crime scene. I then sent out postcards to the neighborhood surrounding the crime scene. I fielded calls, emails, text messages, and I conducted interviews. Most of the people that I spoke to did not want their identities revealed, but overwhelmingly they wanted this murder solved because of the respect and love they had for Bobby that was extremely well thought of in the neighborhood. We might not ever even know who pulled the trigger, but we're getting closer to the truth by examining this murder with a fine-tooth comb. What Bobby's neighbors, friends, and family say. The crime scene. 1513 South Mayo. Compton PD case number 9635843. Bobby was waiting in his 1994 Acura NSX for a workout partner to arrive as he had made arrangements to go to the gym. An early 90s dark blue Honda approached from the Greenleaf side of Mayo and pulled up alongside. There, the driver was speaking to Bobby for a few minutes through both of their open driver's side windows. Bobby was calm, looking down, thumbing through his CDs, and occasionally looking over at his killer. Their cars were facing in opposite directions, and the driver's side door was pulled up to driver's side door. The gun was raised, and 13 shots were fired. 12 of those shots hit Bobby Finch's body. Bobby was hit in the neck, in the chest, stomach, leg, and ankle. Most of the gunshots were through the driver's side door. None of the other glass was busted out or had bullet holes. The house was also not shot up. The assailant drove away. One eyewitness had been watching from a fairly close distance, the workout partner, and once the shooter drove away, he was the first one on the scene. He helped Bobby out of the car and onto the ground in the middle of the street. Paramedics arrived fairly quickly. They began plugging the bullet holes to stop the bleeding. Bobby was carefully lifted and placed on a gurney. He was then wheeled to the ambulance, and by then police had arrived and sealed off the block on both ends with crime scene tape. On the Bennett side, there was only crime scene tape, and no police were at that end of the block. At the Greenleaf side, there was a single patrol car to keep people out. About 15 to 20 minutes after the shooting, the crime scene tape was lifted to allow the ambulance to exit. Bobby arrived at MLK Trauma Center and went into ICU. The medical team worked tirelessly to save his life. His chest was cracked to access and massage his heart, and they attempted to get his heart restarted, but to no avail. Bobby was pronounced dead 30 to 40 minutes after he was shot. The murder, what Compton School Police say. Kevin Hackey. Mr. Hackey, and I don't know if you know, but one of our officers, Lawrence Finch, the school district, his brother was the first one shot, Bobby Finch. He was shot over on Mayo. Finch has inaudible with me. And basically, when all the raids started, there was a lot. They had got information prior to. Now, to this day, Bobby Finch believed, of course, that Reggie had something to do with it. Which? Reggie Sr.? Well, Jr. basically. Not Sr. at the time, but Sr. in a sense was still talking, telling police business, confidential stuff, thinking he was still one of the boys, and not knowing that Reggie was in Suge's back pocket getting back a couple of years, and even before he got retirement, and then things Reggie has done throughout the years. I was a policeman before Reggie was, but Reggie was a jailer for the city. Reggie got caught stealing prisoners' money, but because okay, have you ever heard, or there are all kinds of talk and bullshit because the gang in there, Suge having anybody killed? Mr. Hackey, yeah, I actually heard, well, put it to you this way. I was actually told by Reggie on 2 different occasions before Finch's brother was killed. Finch's? Okay, Finch, Lawrence Finch, with the Compton School Police. Before Bobby was killed that morning, I was in, maybe I hadn't got on the plane yet, but there was that Tuesday morning before I got to Vegas, I called Reggie and I said, Reggie, Finch's brother just got killed. How do you know about that? Whatever. I mean, the dispatcher at the Compton School Police, Barbara, just called me. This is occurred within like 3 or 4 minutes because the officers from Compton College, because Compton College Police, Mario, who also works part-time for Compton School District Police, when Bobby lived, District Police, where Bobby lived, was like within 2 blocks of the college. So being they heard the gunshots, Mario was the first guy as soon as Bobby got shot. And I called Reggie, and 3 or 4 minutes later, and the incident just occurred because when Mario called for help from, the Compton College paramedics, Our units were there then. There's no way in hell Reggie being Vegas, Reggie would have known about it if they hadn't already set it up. Pool. Why would they set it up? End of tape. Mr. Miller. We're on now. Okay. Hacky. Okay. Let me rephrase this. Finch was a setup. He walked out to his car, got in the car, going to take off and some guy pulled in a sedan and pumped a couple of rounds through the car. He left his house based upon the fact that statement Reggie had made to me. He basically said to me, "Don't mention that to Suge. I already know about it." And I'm like, well, how did you know? This just happened within 3 or 4 minutes. The murder, what Compton police say from the affidavit. On September 11th, 1996, approximately 0905 hours, Bobby Finch was killed in a drive-by shooting at 1513 South Mayo, Southside Crip area. Informants have told police that mob Pyrus are suspects in this murder. The suspect was described as a male, black, in a tan or red 70s or 80s Honda Civic hatchback. Case number 9635843. Las Vegas Police Department advised that the vehicle Cadillac used to shoot Tupac contained 2 to 4 male black occupants, and they've received several anonymous calls, mostly saying Baby Lane shot Tupac. They've also received calls saying Darnell Brim, Bobby Finch, and Davon Brooks were also in the vehicle with Baby Lane. Las Vegas Police Department said that they had received a few more calls stating that Terrence Brown, a.k.a. Brown, a Southside Crip, and Davon Brooks were in the car with Baby Lane. On the morning of September the 18th, 1996, Bobby Finch's funeral was held. Your affiant was contacted by an anonymous informant. The informant said that he grew up with Finch and that Southside Crip, up in the Southside Crip area, they had Southside Crip friends, and the informant said the mob killed Finch. The affidavit was filed on 9/25/1996, and T. Brennan, badge number 156, doesn't even know that Bobby Finch wasn't in Las Vegas. What kind of investigation did he perform? Tim Brennan puts Bobby Finch in the Cadillac in the Tupac shooting. Any conversation with a neighbor would have confirmed that Bobby Finch did not go to Las Vegas. The murders. What Compton police say from Once Upon a Time in Compton, Tim Brennan, Bobby Ladd's book. Day 5, Wednesday, September 11th, 1996 at 9:05 a.m., Bobby Finch walked out of his house at 1513 South Mayo Street in Compton, an area claimed by the Southside Crips, and went to his vehicle, a red vehicle with 2 black males pulled up, opened fire, and gunned Finch down. He died in front of his house, killed by suspects witnesses said were mob Pyru. Tim and Bob believe Finch's murder was a case of mistaken identity. Finch, who had been a bodyguard for several high-profile singers, had ties to Southside Crips, Corey Edwards, Keefe D., and Darnell Brim, but he wasn't a member of the gang. He lived next door to Corey Edwards. Both men were similar in appearance, the same race and the same size, and could easily have been confused. Edwards' name had come up several times in the Tupac investigation. There was yet another violent strike in the gang war, and that erupted in a wake of the Vegas shooting. Now, what the neighbors said was, I read these official statements to the neighbors of Bobby, and they were in shock at how the narrative of the police conflicted with what they remember. Calling this case of mistaken identity is like mistaking Reggie Wright Jr. for Suge Knight. They don't resemble each other physically in any way. Corey Edwards did not resemble Bobby Finch either. Additionally, Bobby was not in Vegas that weekend. He had picked up his boss at Van Nuys Airport about the time the shooting happened in Las Vegas. Equally troubling to them was the notion that a red car had come into the neighborhood to idle for a time, shoot, and then drive off. They remember a dark blue Honda being the car that the shooter was in that day. They also tell of the Sloan brothers that would throw up pigeons if anyone had entered the neighborhood in a red car. That signal would trigger a reaction where this car would have been shot up in the neighborhood before they could have left the neighborhood. Corey Edwards was known to be tight with Reggie Wright Jr. in this neighborhood, so why wouldn't Reggie want to mention this to Suge? Why would Reggie have known about the murder 3 or 4 minutes after it happened? And why would Kevin and Reggie be talking about Bobby Finch being dead when Bobby wasn't dead for 30 to 40 minutes after the shooting, unless Reggie knew the shooter had hit his mark in a high enough percentage that these shots that Reggie could confidently speak about Bobby Finch as dead, even though he had not yet died. A lot of questions remain unanswered. But if we look at this murder in context of other murders we know about, we can get some clues that might help. In the Biggie murder, armor-piercing ammo was used that seems to be consistent with the murder of Bobby Finch. It was an experience modification that was made after the Tupac murder, where Tupac and Suge were not dead, and both were expected to survive. Tupac was hit 4 times. Could it be that 4 days after the Tupac murder, the experience modification was employed to test the new tactic? If so, the results were vastly different, as Bobby was shot 13 times and 12 of those bullets hit the body. In the Biggie murder, 5 shots were fired and 4 hit their mark. Wallace was shot 4 times according to the autopsy report. The fatal bullet entered his right hip and ripped through several organs, including his liver, heart, and lung. The other bullet struck Wallace in his left forearm, his back, and his left thigh. Also, in both the Tupac and Biggie murders, communications were being used. Could communications have also been used in the murder of Bobby Finch? In the Biggie murder, shell casings were brought to Cedars-Sinai Hospital and randomly handed to officers with no chain of custody. Surveillance footage was requested from the hospital to see who dropped off these shell casings and magically was not able to be found. Additionally, a close friend of Reggie Wright Jr. and Sharitha, according to Suge Knight, was Rafael Perez. He was in uniform at the Biggie murder, tainting the shell casings at the crime scene. It was the same Rafael Perez that scammed his way into the morgue to physically see the body of Biggie Smalls that had been placed there under seal. Perez verified that Biggie was in fact dead. And if we look at the tactics employed in both the Tupac and Biggie murders and project them onto the Bobby Finch murder, it wouldn't be a stretch to think that all physical evidence was contained within the dark blue Honda at the shooter used the right hand to shoot Bobby from inside the vehicle where the shell casings would not spill out onto the street. Another Death Row Records murder where shell casings became an issue was the murder of Philip Waldemariam. Those shell casings would have told the tale of 2 guns, a .38 and a .40. Suge Knight told us that a .40 could shoot 38 bullets, so attributing it to a single gun wouldn't be a problem as long as the shell casings disappeared. That's exactly what happened in the Pacific Division evidence locker of LAPD. That evidence was likely stolen by Kevin Gaines, the boyfriend of Sharitha Knight. Reggie bragged about disappearing this evidence to Kevin Hackey. It also wouldn't be a stretch to think that multiple vehicles were used along with the communications equipment similar to Tupac and Biggie murders to ensure the minimum number of witnesses were present for the murder. One car could have blocked off the Greenleaf end of Mayo, while another car blocked off the Bennett side of Mayo for a smooth getaway. What the neighbors said was that around 5:30 p.m., All of them gathered where the murder had occurred in a circle to compare their notes of that day. There was almost no police activity that day. Paramedics arrived, very few police cars, and nobody recalled ever seeing more than one at a time. They were parked on the corner of Greenleaf and Mayo, and police tape was at each end of the street. No collection of physical evidence, and by the time the gathering, the car had been towed away. Nobody from the police department seemed to care about Bobby Finch's murder. Aftermath. Well, there's a lot of fuckery going on in Compton, and there has been for a long time. And it's going to continue as long as the people allow it to happen. Recently, Reggie Wright Jr. told us on his video channel that he hates Omar Bradley and said that Omar lied about the murder rate in Compton. He cited the year Compton PD was disbanded in 2000, where the murder rate was 45, and the next year where the murder rate was 46, as proof that the murder rate did not subside once the Compton PD were disbanded. Looking at a single snapshot is statistically indefensible. It's time to get the record straight with facts, the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And one of the facts is that Reggie Wright Jr. is the entire reason the Compton Police Department was disbanded. Reggie and his father, Reggie Wright Sr., were both deposed in the civil case of Watt versus the city of Compton. The gun that was used to shoot Officer Watt while he was on duty working for the Long Beach PD was in the evidence locker at Compton PD, according to the federal CLETS database that tracks guns. That gun made its way onto the streets, running through death row records, that was being run at the time by Reggie Wright Jr. That gun and shooting triggered the entire investigation into the affairs of the Compton PD. So those of you that are looking to place blame on disbanding the Compton PD can look squarely at the cause, namely Reggie Wright Jr. and Sr. There were rumors for years about Reggie Jr. robbing drug dealers. It's not me making this up. It's the interview conducted by Detective Poole at LAPD with Kevin Hackey, and that was taken on May the 12th, 1998. Kevin Hackey says, Reggie always had a reputation of shaking up the drug dealers, stealing their money and taking off. Detective Fred Miller of LAPD said, Reggie Wright Jr. controlled dope trafficking in Compton. So what was only a rumor back then turned out to be a conviction, as Reggie Wright Jr. pleaded guilty to drug trafficking and money laundering, and his father pleaded guilty to money laundering in 2018. So to put this more simply, prior to handing over the responsibilities to the sheriffs, the Compton PD purged 251 murder investigation files. Those were sons and daughters, mothers and fathers, aunts and uncles of people in Compton, and they were wanting to get closure in the murders of their loved ones, and the chance has been forever purged from this possibility by erasing these files. Did convicted money launderer Reggie Wright Sr. personally purge these files? That will never actually be known, but we do know that he was in charge of homicide for at least part of his time on the Compton police force. Reggie Jr. himself is a suspect in the murders of Tupac, Biggie, Vince Buchanan, Bruce Richardson. His car was involved in the murder of Buntry, and he knew about the murder of Bobby Finch 3 or 4 minutes after that happened. See Kevin Hackey interview. Reggie would have you believe that the murder rate was lower under the Compton PD than it was under the sheriffs. Just the talk of shutting down the Compton PD did bring the murder rate down. That internal affairs investigation probably also helped to bring the rate down too. Fact check. In the 9 years leading up to the vote to disband the Compton Police Department, there were 606 murders in Compton. In the 9 years after the vote, the murder rate dropped to 385. But just because the murder rate dropped doesn't mean that the killings aren't still too high. Last week, Friday night, gunmen arrived at a pool party on Mayo and Greenfield and opened fire. 6 people were shot, and one of them died at the scene. The police response was overwhelming and lasted into the night as dozens of cars responded, cordoned off the area, and investigated the crime. We still don't know exactly what happened, but we have lots of clues to go on over this incident because, in contrast to the Bobby Finch murder, the sheriffs conducted an investigation, a true investigation. About 10 days ago, I was shooting video on Mayo as I investigated the murder of Bobby Finch. I've been speaking with people in the neighborhood, and I found details of the murder that are in severe conflict with the details reported by the police, the Compton police. And why would they lie? And why is the murder of Bobby Finch so important? After nearly 28 years, people are responding to my inquiries. The Bobby Finch murder is significant because it occurred as the first murder after the shooting of Tupac Shakur and Suge Knight in Las Vegas in September of 1996. Because of the Tupac murder, Compton police weighed in on this murder, and we have what they've said about the murder. We also have the statement of Kevin Hackey when he was speaking to Detectives Poole and Miller as the LAPD on Bobby Finch's murder. Kevin Hackey worked alongside Lawrence Finch at the Compton School Police at the time of this murder. The multiple statements are metadata that we can use to get at least part of the truth. The rest of the truth exists out there on the streets, and a number of you might similarly actually have access to clues and be able to bring closure to at least this family and the other families of unsolved murders in the city of Compton that number into the hundreds. At a city council meeting just prior to voting to disband the corrupt Compton Police Department, the mayor of Compton discussed the open murder investigations numbering 275 at the time. But a month after the transition, that number was disclosed by sheriffs to be only 24 open murder investigations. That means that from prior to the vote to disband the corrupt Compton Police Department, 251 murder files were purged from the records of law enforcement. Is there any other evidence of records from the Compton PD being purged? Well, it turns out there is. The Office of Inspector General audited the Compton PD in Report GR 90-03-014 and concluded that all of the CPD's equitable sharing records had been misplaced or destroyed. They also concluded that the Compton Police Department was in material noncompliance on $2.1 million in equitably shared assets. Since the DOJ report details the records were misplaced or destroyed, that tends to confirm that the 251 murder books were also destroyed before the handoff. Those families had their loved ones' records purged by Compton police, might even have a claim against the city of Compton because these records have been eliminated. The city could quite possibly be facing a lawsuit that carries with it significant liability. So this wouldn't be the first time a lawsuit revealed the truth about shady practices regarding dead bodies in Compton. In 2002, a jury in Bellflower has returned a $5 million in verdicts against the cemetery in Compton for burying bodies in the shoulder of a roadway after staging phony gravesite services in a nearby grassy plot. This lawsuit was filed in 1995 against Angels Abbey Memorial Park and took until 2002 to go to trial. This was one of 2 cemeteries in Compton that had bodies dug up, and other bodies were appearing in those cemeteries that were intermixed with the bodies of people that were already interned there. This caused confusion over bodies that belonged in those cemeteries and bodies that were simply discarded there to conceal a crime. No doubt the bodies discarded in these cemeteries were not added to the crime statistics in Compton that generally compared the murder rate at the time of the occurrence. Now, knowing that 251 murder books were purged before the transition begs the question of who was in charge of solving homicides at that time. And that would be convicted money launderer Reggie Wright Sr. Reggie Jr. got the police department shut down, but Reggie Sr. had stewardship over those records, and what once was a rumor of corruption has now been proven with convictions. Every case either of these cops ever touched deserves to be revisited and the convictions potentially overturned. And now we need to also look at all of these purged murders in light of this corruption. Every murder coast to coast is important to America as families have suffered a loss and need closure to move on. One woman that I spoke to was reminiscing about her friend Bobby, and I brought up the lyrics to the song Life Goes On by Tupac when she said, "I'm going to tell you why it's hard for Mayo Street to move on and for the city of Compton can never move on, because it's never been shut down. It's never been shut down. It is a web that continues to spin since 1996, and it's still spinning. The only way that Compton and Mayo Street will have a chance at closure is to know, one, who did it, and if they're alive, to know that they're being prosecuted. That is the only way for anyone to get closure, and sad to say, there's very slim chance of that happening. Your postcard being sent out to the residents is helping residents find some degree of closure in their own way. So now I would just say, if you know anything that can help us solve this murder, please reach out, mdc@michaelcarlin.com. Thank you for listening.
There we got a lot to cover up.
So guys,
What's going on?
Greg Kading is out. His lawyer won't let him do it, so
we've been waiting around for Kading all day, and
yeah, and now
he's not
he's a
coming.
no-show.
Really, I wanted to talk to him because there's so much to ask him.
Yeah.
Puffy was going up the stairs, and he said, I don't care if Tupac died, I don't care if Biggie gotta die, and I don't care if Suge gotta go to prison for the rest of his life.
We gotta have a confession letter on how everything went down and who's responsible.
Now, getting back to Russell was following in the footsteps of his dad, and he was able to work through the LAPD and have all the things that had to be done within the LAPD. He certainly knew the streets very well, and circumstances in his case were far more tragic because he was killed in the line of duty.
If that's the case, did Tupac life mean anything? Because they never saw that case. Sometimes if you saw the first case, you might have saw the second case. But that never happened, correct?
Yep. But he did testify reluctantly. The Death Row Records security chief Reggie Wright Jr. once told him, quote, "We're going to get those mothers who downed Pac."
Ice and I, we've heard consistently, Suge, that you're the person behind the hit on Biggie.
Well, they looked at y'all and told y'all a fat-ass lie.
A reportedly missing photograph and former police chief Bernard Park's daughter came up during testimony today in the wrongful death lawsuit filed against the city by murdered rap star Biggie Smalls' mother.
That, to me, was probably another motive for Chief Parks to want to squash a lot of the information. There was an effort to keep a lot of the information away from the public.
This declaration from a jailhouse informant named Kenny Boagni links crooked LAPD officers David Mack and Rafael Perez to the murder of rap star Biggie Smalls.
Okay. Right? You see, Suge was willing to say, I didn't know those two cops, but maybe Reggie knew them.
Never met those dudes. They never worked for me. They knew Reggie right. They didn't know me.
You always will tell you, those are Reggie people.
And Reggie was fast to say, I didn't know them either.
I was just interested in why he would point the finger at Suge so quick. He wouldn't say it to you, but he definitely pointed it. We call that dry snitching.
That Perez told how he worked security for Death Row Records the night Biggie Smalls was assassinated, and how he and Mac used cell phones to set up the hit. Boagni now says he was instructed by an LAPD detective to share his story with no one else investigating Biggie's murder. Judge Florence Marie Cooper says LAPD may be involved in what she calls deliberate and intentional concealment of information. Jailhouse informant Kenny Boagni ties former LAPD officers David Mack and Rafael Perez to the murder of rap star Biggie Smalls. LAPD has withheld reams of other evidence as well, including at least 2 other jailhouse statements implicating dirty cops Mack and Perez in Biggie's murder. 1,000 pages of information were withheld describing Mack and Perez's involvement in Biggie's murder. 3 different jailhouse informants who offered to wear a wire were all turned down by LAPD. A wire, say informants, that could have caught jailed officer Perez boasting about his involvement with Death Row Records and the Biggie Smalls murder. Judge Florence Marie Cooper lists all the new information she says links former crooked LAPD officers David Mack and Rafael Perez to the murder of Biggie Smalls. The sheer volume of the information, says the judge, belies any LAPD argument that it comes from just another jailhouse informant.
Murder is pretty simple. The first person you go after is the spouse.
Perez and them was all involved. They were trying to kill me too, but see, because Perez and Reg was good friends, and Perez and Sharita and Reg is great friends, and so all those 3 together was trying to plot. Those guys, if you go back and watch the film, they was already stalking Pac, watching him. So that just tipped the iceberg when something happened. But there was a plan already to do something to him. Orlando wasn't even the shooter, you know? He was actually a good kid too, you know? I'm quite sure if they saw the first one, they saw the second one, because it's the same circle of people.
You got a lot to cover up, y'all.
Freudian slip.
You got a lot to cover up.
Murder is pretty simple. The first person you go after is the spouse.
All the artists at Death Row was willing to come with me.
David Mack worked for you, right?
No, ma'am.
Never?
Never met him, never heard of him. Didn't know who he was until the accusations that he possibly did work for me. And that's been investigated by LAPD and all of that.
Why would I want a paper trail when I never brought him around nowhere? So if I'm gonna hide him in secret, you think I'm gonna let somebody catch a paper trail? It was paid cash by Snoop.
Perez and them was all involved. They were trying to kill me too, but see, because Perez and Reg was good friends, and Perez and Sharita and Reg is great friends, and so all those 3 together was trying to plot.
How about Rafael Perez?
Never heard of him until all the incidents happened.
Those guys, if you go back and watch the film, they was already stalking Pac, watching him. So that just tipped the iceberg when something happened. But there was a plan already to do something to him.
So why does everyone keep telling me that David Mack was working for you?
Yeah, I never heard that.
You've never heard that?
That he worked for me.
You've never heard that?
Wait a minute, let me clear that up. I'm saying by anyone that's credible, that will work around there or anything. Like I said, that was all investigated by LAPD, and I turned over my payroll, everything. You always will tell you, those are Reggie people.
Orlando wasn't even the shooter, you know? He was actually a good kid too, you know? I'm quite sure if they saw the first one, they saw the second one, because it's the same circle of people.
got a lot to cover up, y'all.
Freudian slip.
You got a lot to cover up.